Presenter. Welcome, Nadia.
Thank you, Lisa. Appreciate it. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'm really excited. I wanted to share a little bit of my life story and some of the hardships that my immigrant family has experienced that pretty much led me down this road to building resilience, and why I wanted to make this talk kind of about how I've learned to find resilience with my art. So some of the feelings I dealt with growing up were like feelings of being uprooted and confused about my identity. I always felt stuck between these two opposing cultures. And I found art to be a really powerful force for finding my equilibrium, my inner strength, and the will to get through difficult times like the ones we're in right now. So I want to share how art has helped me get through those times, and also heal some of the wounds from the past. So I was born in a city called Krasnoyarsk. It is very cold. So you can see in the photographs, those are two photographs taken near Krasnoyarsk. They the top photo is ice sculptures. So all winter long, there are permanent ice sculpture installations because they don't melt in the winter. So you see like these remarkable artistic sculptures and all sorts of, like, they make entire playgrounds for children out of ice there. And then the bottom photo, you can see how like the snow just like sticks to the trees, and you just feel like you're in this like winter wonderland. So it's both immensely beautiful and immensely cold and uncomfortable, which perhaps you could say I was maybe born into that resilience a little bit, because being born in that place, you kind of have to have a little bit of a little bit of strength in you. Um, so my parents, they met in college. They were both pursuing their master's degrees in physics. And my dad helped my mom with her studies, and that's how they became close. I was named after my maternal grandmother, Nadezhda. That's my full name, is Nadezhda Andreevna. Um, and Nadezhda means hope. And so unfortunately, my maternal grandmother, she passed away when my mother was only 21 years old. And my mom was devastated when her mother passed. She didn't have any warning. My grandmother didn't tell her that she was dying. But now, when we talked about it later on, when I was older, my mom told me that one of the last conversations she had with her, she told her, like, me and Andrew's my dad, me and Andrew are going to move to America. And so it's almost like she somehow knew like that something was going to happen. So she always like marvels, like, why would she blurt that out so suddenly to her mother like that? But after my maternal grandmother died, my mom moved in with my dad's family. Um, so that's a little bit sad, but I wanted to balance it out with a happy story. So a fun thing about living in such a cold place, in the winter, rather than having a stroller, my dad would bundle me up in a million layers. And so all you could see is my like tiny infant face. And he would strap me to a sled and pull me on a string. And so one time he was running so fast to get out of the cold, and he was running home, and my mom was watching him from the window in their apartment building. And as my dad was running, he pulled a little too hard on the string, and I went flying into a snowbank. And my mom could see from the window, and she's like horrified. And my dad's horrified, and he runs and comes to get my little infant self, and he picks me up thinking like, oh no. And I'm just like all smiles and like red cheeks, like, oh, that was fun. So yeah, sometimes going on a ride in a sled is pretty exciting. All right. So it was a pretty chaotic time when I was born, the 90s. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, I was born right before the collapse, sent Russia into chaos. So there was zero transition plan. Businesses shut down, and it was just very difficult. So it was not uncommon for families to live in tight constraints all together. So in my case, I was living in a one-bedroom with my paternal grandmother, great-grandmother, my grandfather, and of course my mom and dad. So we were all in one little apartment. And I was apparently a very easy child. I didn't cry very much. I don't know, that's what my parents always tell me, that I was a very easy kid. And I think that's probably because I was so overstimulated by that many people being in such a small house, and probably all really excited to have a baby in the house as well. So I imagine I was just like, please leave me alone. Um, anyway, so this is a painting of my that I did of my grandmother, my father's mother, and she is in the birch tree forest, which was near where I was, the home where that we lived. And the birch tree forest is like one of my like fondest memories. It's just like a really special, beautiful place. And birch trees in Russia are a powerful folk symbol of purity, femininity, and fertility. So birch trees do come up in my art repeatedly for that reason. So I came to America pretty young. My dad had ambitions to get a student visa, well before I was even born. But he arrived in America with $500 and he was ready to study physics. So he went through a whole process of studying for years, studying the English language, studying the exams, like the TOEFL, which he needed to take. He needed to fly to Moscow. It was very difficult to acquire the materials to learn English at that time. So his mother, my grandmother, would spend entire months worth of her salary on the materials that he needed to study the language. So it was a really big bet for my family. Like there was a lot riding on them being able to come here. But you know, despite naysayers and other people and friends of my family that were like, you're never gonna go there. Like to them, it was like going to the moon. Um, but we did it. So the first day my parents took me to Toys R Us and I was so excited. But then I had to give it to the cashier for them to check it, you know, to like scan it. And I thought that they were taking it away and I was so upset. So that was like one of the first days of in America. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the pictures. The top one is an artwork I did when I was like 6 or 7 years old. I think there was a little bit of help from the art teacher, but I was really into these fantastical cats. And I drew them with gel pen. Unfortunately, the color version, this is a photo of the artwork and the color version is gone. So it was actually drawn in color. But yeah, so just as an example of some of the really early art I did. And just to go back a slide for a second, I'm actually wearing my grandmother's dress here. And I have a few heirlooms from Krasnoyarsk. This is a cutting board and it has the name for Krasnoyarsk in Cyrillic. I don't know how well you can see it. But these are both brought home from there. This is a little cup that also says Krasnoyarsk. It might be hard to see, but this is like forgetting the word for it, but like a pine tree, the needles on the pine tree. Yeah, so didn't want to just skip over that, but back to where I was. So my mom was worried that I would lose my connection to my heritage, and she insisted that I continue studying Russian even after we moved to America. But she also really valued my education. So she was so like motivated, and I would always say like her love language was labor. So like she somehow negotiated with the preschool that where we live next to like this preschool, and it cost money to attend, but she negotiated that if she worked there as a janitor for free, that I would be able to go. Like they basically agree, like, okay, you work as a janitor and we'll take your daughter to preschool. And at the same time, my mother was getting her PhD in physics alongside my dad. So both my parents were in school. They were very stressed and very busy. And in the meantime, I was going to school and I was getting exposed to American culture. And then I would come home and experience a very, very Russian culture. And so I was often suffering from like cultural whiplash. Like I would come to school and the teacher would be like, you did a great job. And then I would come home and my parents would be like, no, you didn't. Not literally that, but like it was just a very like the idea that you needed to like praise your kid was kind of different in Russian culture. Like it's more about like, you know, you want to motivate them to try harder and do more and kind of like put your best foot forward. But it was just kind of jarring sometimes to receive these like gold stars and then be told that that was that didn't mean anything. And, just like figuring that out and like trying to navigate like what all of this means as a kid was very difficult. So to say a few words about the art on this page, the top left is like a sort of like a self-portrait of me trying to make sense of like these opposing cultures. And because both the Russian and American flag have red, blue, and white in them, I sort of like incorporated those colors and make this sort of abstract face. And then the bottom right is sort of a symbolic piece. I kind of associate myself with the dog image of a dog because I'm like a pretty loyal person. I kind of like stick to people once I get to know them. I'm very like stay close to them and try to like protect them. The bridge is about like seeking connection to my past and my future and just like trying to connect the two. And the window is sort of me like reflecting to the past, which is what a lot of my artwork tries to do and tries to like make sense of things. So when I got here and I started to settle in, we would go to the park a lot and we would just kind of hang out there just to be outside. And I started to get like more exposure to nature. And we met another Russian family. And my dad has this very loud, booming voice. So this other Russian family heard him speaking in Russian. And they came over and they had a young daughter about the same age as me. And so what we enjoyed doing together was going and collecting caterpillars and making these custom terrariums. At the time, I became very interested in insects and actually was telling everyone that I wanted to be an entomologist. So I kind of rediscovered that love as an adult, and I made these artworks of so the one at the top is actually incorporates some collage from this book I have called The Big Book of Bugs, which I've had since I was a kid. And that was just like my favorite book. I love to look at all the different bugs. And then the bottom two are more like just your typical kind of nature, not typical, but there's no bugs in it, but it's still nature. Um, So when I started fifth grade, we had to leave Ohio altogether because my parents finished their studies and they essentially had to find jobs right away to stay in the country because of, I don't know all the details of how the visas work. I think it was like something to do with their work visa agreement because they didn't have green cards yet. So later on they got green cards, thankfully. But at the time it was just very stressful. So they were looking for any job they could get. And they got a job, or my dad got a job in Washington State. So we ended up moving all the way across the country. And at the time, it felt like my life was flipped completely upside down. Didn't know anybody there, didn't have any friends, and like had like 2 months left of fifth grade. So I just remember like being brought in front of this classroom and like kind of in those like old like movies where they like show the kid like having to introduce themselves and all the kids are like staring at them and just that like awkward situation. That's like what I had in real life where the teacher was like, okay, tell me to introduce yourself to the class. And I was like, I don't know what's happening. So yeah, at that time I spent a lot of my time alone. I was on the computer watching TV, just felt really isolated. And later on, I became really interested in images of like abandoned places and really drawn to like things that were abandoned in general. So the drawing at the top is one of those abandoned places that I saw, and I just was like really interested in wanting to draw. Like it's just it's like sad, but it's also like powerful the way that like nature's taking it back. So those kinds of places resonated with me. And then the bottom was is one of the paintings I did in middle school. I was still very interested in cats, apparently. I really love cats. So I painted a leopard. Um, all right, so then I started college. I did have several moves. So we moved to Washington State, then I moved to Minnesota. So I went to high school in Minnesota um, and moved around twice. I was in two different parts. I was first in Rochester, Minnesota, then in Byron, or sorry, backwards, Byron, then Rochester. They're somewhat near each other, but I still had to switch schools. So there's still a lot of like, just a lot of change and a lot of like making new friends and doing that over and over again. And again, moving to attend college because I was in Minnesota. I actually wanted to stay in Minnesota, but it didn't work out. So I'm glad I went to Oberlin though, because that's where I met my husband. And it also gave me the chance to explore different things because it was a liberal arts school, is a liberal arts school. I was torn with technology, between technology and art. I was really interested in both. And Oberlin allowed me to explore both of those areas, and how I ended up today being an engineer or a software developer and also an artist. So while I was in college, I explored a lot of like media art, video art. These are a few slides that are from some of the media art that I did. So they're stills, so like they're whole videos, but you can still kind of see how I was interested in color. Like that was something I kept exploring a lot, even in my media art. It was like these really intense, dramatic colors. And definitely there's still a bit of a melancholic quality there. So in my senior year, I took senior studio and I actually had a whole show of my work, which I guess if you go back the slide, that was one of the shows I did, was with the birch tree paintings. But soon enough, I graduated and the career anxiety started to set in. Um, After graduation, I stayed for a couple of years in Ohio, living with my then fiance, now husband. And Oberlin is a college in a very rural setting. And once you graduate, you feel sort of out of place. And because it's an hour's drive from the nearest city, I really felt like a little bit too, I felt like the isolation I had from previous times in my life was like coming back to haunt me, and I didn't love that. So even though I was really happy to have a job right after graduation and being able to work in the art department with students on art projects was like fulfilling, I still felt like I needed a longer term plan. So I started to teach myself JavaScript, which is programming language used in web development. And this helped me to get my first web development job in St. Louis, which was where we moved after 2 years. And we did not stay in St. Louis for very long. We were only there for a year. So my husband, he applied to law school, he got into Georgetown, and before I knew it, we were packing our bags again. But it was also an exciting time. I was really excited to come to DC, to see so much art in the National Gallery of Art. Like one of the artists, a couple artists who really inspire me, Edward Munch and Kandinsky. It was really cool to see Kandinsky's work in person at the National Gallery of Art, and Edward Munch as well. So even though I pretty much put art aside to start doing my programming and advancing my programming career, I still like engaged in the cultural activities of the city. And I was job hopping for about 6 years. I was trying to figure out where I wanted to be in the world of software development. I worked at a lot of different startups. About every 6 months, I was changing jobs. Um, and eventually I hit a burnout. So my husband, he had graduated from law school by then, and we kind of had a conversation. And so he ended up agreeing, and he supported me in taking a year off of work. So during that time, I enrolled in a year-long art program, and I learned oil painting. I improved my drawing skills, and I developed a much better understanding of myself. So this is one of the first drawings I did in the program, just of these pairs. And I just realized like, wow, like I haven't been doing art in so long, and like I just lost like a part of myself when I wasn't like engaging in that. And this is a sampling of the art that I made during the program. So every week we would have like at least like 2 drawings, 2 paintings. I think later on it was 1 drawing, 1 painting, but it would be impossible to fit all the images into one slide. So this is just a sampling of some of the ones I'm most proud of. And you can see there's like a little bit of everything in there. And towards the end of the program, I started getting introduced to the idea of working in a series. So this is one of the first series of paintings that I did. And this one's kind of special because I did them all at the same time. So I cut out all the papers at the same time. And then I did each layer of all 6 all together. So I would like do one painting in charcoal, then the next one in charcoal, then go back and do the next layer. So it's like charcoal, then watercolor, then acrylic, then some marker. And so I was constantly like going from one painting to another. But the cool thing about doing it that way and doing them all together at once is like they end up looking really cohesive and like they all belong together. And it was also, this series was incredibly intuitive, like really channeling Kandinsky and not really thinking about like what I want the composition to look like, just kind of like making marks and sort of like seeing what happens. So it was, I think, kind of a turning point for me with my artwork.
Are you able to click on each image to show us a close-up?
Sorry, unfortunately, no.
Oh, okay. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Um, so then I did another series with where I was exploring kind of the mother wound and what happened to my mom, like losing her mother at such a young age, and just that like loss of the maternal figure. Um, so all these paintings are actually the sources I used were photos of these Victorian era little girls, and they all look incredibly serious, which reminded me of like photos I've seen of from the Soviet Union where like kids just look very serious. They don't look like that happy necessarily. Um, so and the way that they like carry the doll is like so serious. So I kind of wanted to channel that. Um, and so I made this was, I guess, a shorter series. There's only what, like 5 artworks there, and I included a sketch, but I might continue with this series. I've just haven't decided where I want to take it. But definitely one of the more like personal series of paintings I did. Then I kind of went back to abstract again. This series was inspired by the epic poem Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. If you're not familiar with it, I'll try to summarize. It's about a sailor who um, kills this great seabird, the albatross, and ends up cursing his ship and the other sailors, um, and being cursed himself to kind of witness their suffering and be the only one to like live past this horrible thing that he did. So it's kind of about like the great power of nature and how you have to like respect nature, and also like I guess it's a little bit about like the fear, or like the fear of the underwater world and how like great and vast it is. At least that's my interpretation. So I guess I kind of wanted to capture a little bit of that like fear of the unknown, but also like the beauty, um, and just like needing that importance of like embracing the unknown and embracing the nature and the ocean, and like really it's still kind of connected to my interest in nature, I guess. So that leads me back to nature in general, which is what I've been doing since. I have some of the nature paintings behind me. This was a very recent one I did of an black iris, with cold wax medium. This one up here was actually something I redid. I started with a different painting and then I revisited it much later and was like, these flowers, something doesn't quite right. So I basically painted over it completely, and I'm much happier with it now. I was inspired by a photograph of flowers trapped in ice. And so I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. And basically, I've come back to nature like during COVID, especially my husband and I started to go outside more and go outside the DC area. And we would go to these national parks, like we would go to Shenandoah. And I just felt like so connected to the places that we went to, like even just like noticing small details, like a little like colorful leaf or like a bit of moss or like an insect or something. It really helped me with resilience, with like realizing that I'm connected to all of this and that nature is eternal. Like it's so much more powerful than any of us are individually. And, even with the changing of seasons, leaves die, they grow back, like everything is kind of shifting and changing, but it's okay. It's part of how nature was designed, or how nature works. So anyway, I find that nature is what has really helped me with resilience, and channeling that has made me feel stronger internally. So I keep coming back to that now, and that's really been a big source of inspiration for my latest work. Yeah, and I think with that, I've come to the end of my slides. I have art for sale on my website. A lot of the original art is there. If there's a piece you see behind me that's not there, that you're interested in, there's a form on there you can use to contact me. I'm also on Instagram and YouTube. I've actually been moving a lot of my content over to YouTube because I find that it's a little easier to manage